The wind carried dust across the empty ranch road as the wagon wheels slowly creaked to a stop. The young woman sitting inside held a worn letter in trembling hands, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fragile hope. She had traveled hundreds of miles across lonely plains to marry a man she had never met, a rancher who promised her a new life, a home, and a future. But as she stepped down from the wagon and saw the small crowd gathered near a wooden church, the truth struck her like lightning. The man she came to marry was already lying in a coffin. Before we continue this emotional journey, take a second to support the channel. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us of the strength inside ordinary people, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who loves powerful stories, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. Her name was Clara Whitmore, and she had arrived with nothing but a small suitcase, a photograph of the rancher she was supposed to marry, and a heart full of cautious dreams. The ranch was supposed to be her salvation. Back in the crowded factory town she left behind, life had been little more than endless work, cold nights, and loneliness. The letter from Thomas Hale, the rancher, had promised something different. In his careful handwriting, he described open skies, horses running free, and a small wooden house that needed laughter and warmth. He wrote about partnership, about building a future together. But now that future lay 6 feet under the dry earth. Clara stood at the edge of the funeral gathering, clutching her suitcase as strangers stared at her with curiosity. The coffin rested beneath a crooked wooden cross. The ranch hands stood silently, their faces rough from years of sun and wind. A preacher spoke softly about a good man taken too soon. Clara felt like a ghost watching someone else's tragedy. She had never even met Thomas, yet somehow she felt grief pressing against her chest. After the burial ended and people slowly began to leave, Clara remained where she stood. The ranch house sat in the distance, its roof glowing under the harsh afternoon sun. Horses shifted restlessly in a nearby corral. The land stretched endlessly beyond it all, wild and unforgiving. One of the ranch hands eventually approached her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with gray streaks in his beard and suspicion in his eyes. He asked who she was and why she had come. Clara showed him the letters. When he realized she was the woman Thomas had been writing to, the man's expression softened with a mixture of pity and disbelief. Thomas had spoken about her often in the months before his death. The rancher had believed she would arrive before winter, but fate had different plans. The ranch hand explained that Thomas had died only 3 days earlier in a violent confrontation with a group of men who had been trying to take the land. They were powerful cattle barons who believed without Thomas, they assumed the land would soon fall into their hands. Clara listened quietly. Her journey had taken everything she had. She had sold her belongings, spent her savings, and crossed the country chasing a promise that now lay buried. There was nowhere else to go. There was nowhere else to go. That night, she slept in the empty ranch house Thomas had built with his own hands. The wind rattled the wooden walls as if whispering secrets through the dark. On the table, she found more letters he had written but never sent. They spoke of plans for expanding the ranch, dreams of raising cattle, and hopes for building a family. Clara read them until dawn. By morning, something inside her had changed. The ranch hands expected her to leave. Most believed the land would soon belong to the cattle barons anyway. A young woman alone could never survive the brutal world of frontier ranching. But Clara stepped outside that morning with quiet determination. She looked at the endless land Thomas had loved, and she decided she would stay. At first, the men laughed gently at the idea. Ranching required strength, experience, and the ability to face danger without hesitation. Clara had none of those things, but she refused to leave. Day after day, she worked beside the ranch hands, learning everything she could. Her hands blistered from ropes and tools. The sun burned her skin. She fell from horses and struggled to lift heavy supplies, yet she kept going. Slowly, the laughter stopped. The ranch hands began to see something unexpected in her. Beneath her quiet voice and tired eyes was a stubborn courage that refused to break. Weeks passed and Clara transformed. She learned how to ride across the dusty plains without fear. She memorized every fence line, every water source, every hidden corner of the land. She studied Thomas's notebooks and discovered the careful plans he had drawn for the ranch's future. It was as if the ranch itself was teaching her how to survive, but the peace didn't last. One evening, riders appeared on the horizon. The cattle barons had returned. They arrived with arrogance and confidence, certain that the ranch would now be easy to claim. Their leader spoke with cold authority, explaining that the land would soon be sold to them, whether Clara agreed or not. They believed she would surrender. Instead, she stood her ground. The ranch hands watched in stunned silence as Clara faced the men without flinching. Her voice remained steady as she declared the land still belonged to Thomas Hale's ranch, and now she intended to protect it. The men laughed as they rode away, but the threat was real. From that day forward, the ranch became a battlefield of patience and courage. The cattle barons tried everything: cut fences, stolen cattle, intimidation. Every morning, Clara woke not knowing what new challenge would appear. Yet she refused to give up. Her determination slowly united the ranch hands behind her. What had started as doubt turned into fierce loyalty. They realized she was not just protecting land. She was protecting Thomas's dream. The months that followed were the hardest of Clara's life. There were nights when exhaustion nearly broke her spirit. There were moments when fear whispered that the world was simply too cruel for someone like her. But every time she looked across the wide plains, she remembered why she had stayed. This ranch was more than a promise. It was proof that hope could survive even in the harshest places. Then came the day everything changed. The cattle barons returned again, this time with more men and clear intentions. They believed fear would finally force Clara to surrender. But they hadn't expected the transformation that had taken place. Clara stood in the center of the ranch yard holding a rifle, surrounded by loyal ranch hands who were ready to defend their home. The woman who had once arrived with trembling hands now carried herself with quiet authority. The confrontation lasted only minutes. The barons realized something they had never considered before. This ranch was no longer vulnerable. It had a leader willing to fight for every inch of it. And that leader was the mail order bride who had arrived too late to marry the man who invited her. So, if this story is touching your heart so far, take a moment to engage with the video. Stories like this survive because of viewers like you. A simple like, comment, or share helps keep these powerful stories alive for others to discover. Years passed and the ranch slowly flourished. Clara expanded the land, built stronger barns, and increased the cattle herds. What once seemed impossible became reality through patience, courage, and relentless effort. But the most remarkable change wasn't the land, it was Clara herself. She had arrived as a stranger searching for a home. She had become the heart of the entire ranch. Travelers passing through the region often heard the story. They spoke of the woman who came to marry a rancher, but instead inherited his dream and turned it into something even greater. Before we reach the final moment of this story, I have a special request for you. Comment the word "encourage" below if you believe that one determined person can change their destiny, no matter how impossible life seems. One evening many years later, Clara walked to the small hill behind the ranch house where a simple wooden cross stood beneath a lone tree. The sunset painted the sky in deep shades of gold and crimson. Thomas Hale rested there. She placed fresh flowers beside the cross and looked out across the land that had once seemed so overwhelming. The ranch stretched farther than the eye could see, alive with cattle, horses, and the quiet rhythm of hard-earned success. Clara whispered a silent thank you to the man she never truly met, because without his letters, she might never have discovered the strength she carried within herself all along. And somewhere in the whispering wind across the plains, it almost felt like the rancher who had once dreamed of this life was smiling. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable stories that remind us of the power of resilience and hope. Your support truly keeps these stories alive. The wind that swept across the plains that evening carried the scent of dust, hay, and something deeper, something that felt like the quiet echo of a promise finally fulfilled. Clara Whitmore stood beside the wooden cross beneath the lonely tree, watching the sun sink slowly into the endless horizon. The ranch stretched out before her like a living memory of everything she had endured. Years earlier, she had arrived here as a stranger with a small suitcase and a fragile dream. Now the land breathed with life because she had refused to walk away. But the story of the ranch did not end with victory over the cattle barons. In many ways, that moment had only been the beginning. Running a ranch in the unforgiving frontier was never simple. Each season carried its own battles. Winters arrived like silent enemies, burying the plains beneath icy winds that cut through wooden walls and rattled windows through the night. Summers brought droughts that cracked the earth and turned green pastures into brittle fields of dust. Every sunrise meant new responsibilities and new risks. Yet Clara faced each challenge with the same quiet determination that had carried her through that first impossible year. The ranch hands who once doubted her had become something closer to family. They respected her not because she demanded authority, but because she earned it day after day. She rode with them at sunrise, worked beside them until sunset, and made every decision with the ranch's future in mind. Word about the ranch slowly spread across the territory. Travelers passing through nearby towns often told the same remarkable story. They spoke of a woman who had come across the country as a mail order bride only to discover her future husband buried before she could even meet him. Most people would have turned around and left, but Clara stayed, and because she stayed, the ranch non-daved, the ranch survived. As the years passed, the ranch slowly transformed into one of the most respected properties in the region. Clara introduced new grazing systems she had discovered in Thomas's notebooks. She expanded the barns, repaired old fences, and built new water wells that kept the cattle alive during brutal summers. The once struggling land now supported hundreds of animals and provided steady work for families who had nowhere else to go. But even as the ranch flourished, Clara never forgot the loneliness that had once followed her here. One autumn afternoon, a wagon arrived carrying a small family who had lost everything in a fire that destroyed their homestead. The father looked tired and defeated. The mother held two frightened children close to her side, and their belongings fit inside a single wooden trunk. Clara recognized the look in their eyes. It was the same look she had carried when she first arrived, so she offered them a chance to stay. That moment quietly changed the future of the ranch in ways Clara never expected. Word spread that the Hale Ranch was a place where people were given second chances. Soon others began arriving. Widowers, former soldiers, struggling farmers, and families searching for a place where hard work could still build a future. Clara did not turn them away. Instead, she gave them opportunity. Slowly, the ranch became more than land and cattle. It became a community. Small cabins appeared along the hills. Children's laughter echoed across fields where silence once ruled. Fires burned at night as neighbors shared stories beneath the stars. The ranch had grown into something alive, something Thomas himself had once imagined in his letters. And every time Clara walked past the old wooden desk where those letters were still carefully kept, she felt as if the man she never met had somehow helped guide her path. But life has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. Nearly 10 years after Clara first arrived, a terrible drought struck the region. Rain vanished from the sky for months. Rivers shrank into narrow trickles, and grass turned brown across miles of land. Ranches throughout the territory began collapsing under the pressure. Some ranchers were forced to sell their land for almost nothing. Others simply abandoned everything. The drought threatened to destroy everything Clara had spent years building. Each morning, she rode across the fields, studying the condition of the cattle and calculating how much water remained. Supplies grew thinner by the week. Fear slowly crept into the hearts of the people who depended on the ranch. But Clara refused to surrender. She remembered something Thomas had written long ago in one of his final letters. He had believed the land held hidden strength if someone was patient enough to understand it. Clara began searching for that strength. Days of riding through distant corners of the property, she discovered something remarkable, a small natural spring hidden within a rocky valley far beyond the main pastures. The water was not large, but it flowed steadily even during the drought. It was enough to save the ranch if they acted quickly. The next several weeks became the most exhausting effort the community had ever faced. Men, women, and even children worked together digging trenches and building channels to carry water across the land. Their hands bled, their muscles ached, and the sun beat down without mercy. But no one quit because they believed in what the ranch had become. Finally, one early morning, the water reached the main fields. It flowed slowly at first, glistening in the sunlight as it spread across the thirsty earth. The cattle drank eagerly. The soil darkened, and for the first time in months, hope returned to the ranch. The drought did not disappear overnight, But the ranch survived, and once again, Clara had protected the dream she inherited. Years continued to pass, and Clara's hair slowly turned silver beneath the wide hats she wore while riding across the plains. The ranch expanded even further, becoming a symbol of resilience in a land that often showed little mercy. But one thing never changed. Every evening, no matter how busy the day had been, Clara walked to the small hill behind the ranch house where the wooden cross still stood beneath the old tree. Thomas Hale remained there, the man who had unknowingly changed her life forever. She would stand quietly for a moment, watching the sun fall across the same land that once frightened her. The wind rustled the tall grass as if whispering the story of everything that had happened. Sometimes she imagined what life might have been like if he had lived. Perhaps they would have built the ranch together. Perhaps they would have raised children who ran through these same fields. But Clara never allowed regret to take root in her heart. Because in an unexpected way, Thomas had still given her everything he promised in those letters: a home, a purpose, a future. Before we reach the final moments of this journey, I want to ask you something heartfelt. If this story of courage, loss, and second chances has touched you in any way, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in the power of perseverance, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. And I have a special request for you. Right now in the comments, write the word hope, because that one word is what carried Clara through the darkest days of her life. Many years later, when Clara had grown old and the ranch had become a thriving settlement, travelers still arrived asking about the legendary woman who saved the land after arriving too late to marry its owner. They expected to meet someone extraordinary. But those who knew Clara always said the same thing. She was simply a woman who refused to give up. On her final evening, many decades after she first stepped off that wagon, Clara once again climbed the small hill behind the ranch house. The sky glowed orange and purple as the sun disappeared beyond the plains. The ranch spread out below her, alive with cattle, barns, homes, and families who now called the land their own. Everything she had fought for stood there. She placed a gentle hand on the wooden cross, and for a moment she smiled.